So welcome back to the KPW podcast here, and today we're glad to be joined by Marshall Garvey, a writer from Sacramento, California. Marshall Garvey has written or co-written three books, and the most recent one is titled Interstate 85, The Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. That's coming out in late March 2025. So welcome, Marshall. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been 40 years, obviously, from 1985, the 1985 World Series. And, we think about Kansas City sports teams. I think it's natural to talk about the Chiefs for all their success in the past few years in the NFL. But of course, the Royals, this is their 40th anniversary of the 1985 championship season. So Marshall, can you share how the idea came about, to write this book? Because I know you're a Dodger fan, also a Twins fan. So, what did you tell us about that?
Well, it's quite a story. So the idea came about on April 15th, 2020, 5 years ago. That's 1 month into coronavirus lockdown. I had recently self-published my first book, Hidden History of Sacramento Baseball, but COVID interrupted that promotion circuit. And I was a full-time remote writer, income-wise at the time, still am. Um, and I realized, like, look, this virus isn't going away. I've got to hunker down and start work on my next baseball book, something even more specific, like like I had a general history with Sacramento baseball. Let's pick a really specific topic. And I went on a train of thought during my jog on that April 15th, and a friend of mine, Jonathan Daniel, was doing a book about the 82 World Series. That's Cardinals and Brewers. So my train of thought just goes up to 85, Cardinals and Royals. And it just clicked. Like as I was running, I'm running down Sunrise Boulevard here in Citrus Heights, and then I go to Madera Park. That's where I would run a lot. I just kept thinking, like, you've got something here. No one's really written about 85 book-wise. And I came up with the title Interstate 85 while running around listening to Thunder Road by Bruce Springsteen. And yeah, I never looked back. And 5 years later, here we are on the eve of release.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned the 82 Cardinals team. I mean, you think about it a little bit, I know the Royals won in 85, but think about the 82 Cardinals team. And, in that decade of the 80s, only the LA Dodgers, were a team that won multiple championships, from 1979 to 1992. For more than a decade, was a different World Series champion other than the LA Dodgers in 81 and 88. Now, the Cardinals could have, won three times in that decade alone. In 82, 85, they lost in Game 7 to the Royals. 87, they lost in Game 7 to the Minnesota Twins.
Hmm.
So, I know that you talked to, the Cardinals players as well. For this book, you focus on them as much as you did the Royals. So, I mean, were you able to ask any hard questions to the Cardinals players? Because if it obviously it felt like in 85 they were robbed. In 87 there were suspicions of like the Twins doing something with the air conditioning and the dome to have the ball blowing in when the Cardinals were hitting. Did you get any sense of bitterness or reflection from the Cardinals in that regard?
That's a great question. Well, in 87, I mean, they just straight up the Twins had the much better offense, and I think they admitted that after. But for 85, I know that that's a sore spot because that 85 Cardinals team was a great team. They won 101 games. They were the winningest team in MLB that year. And if they win that, then they would be like the next dynasty. The Cardinals have always had multiple championships in many decades. So I did talk to seven Cardinal players, and it really wasn't a whole lot of bitterness. There were some pretty nuanced takes. Um, Andy Van Slyke, for example, he didn't feel robbed about Denkinger. He was kind of focused more on the fact that he thinks the Cardinals got a little ahead of themselves, and he thought that they embarrassed themselves in Game 7, especially with Joaquin Andujar's tantrum and getting ejected. Kurt Kepshire, uh, starting pitcher for the 85 team, says he blames himself because he thought that he should have been able to pitch Game 5, and if they had done that, won that game, they would have won in 5 games. So yeah, the seven Cardinals I talked to were really cool about it. Yeah, just yeah, no real like bitterness, no just yeah, very very nuanced and cool takes from the Cardinals I talked to, and I'm glad I got to talk to seven of them.
Now that's interesting. You mentioned that the Cardinals might have won in 5 games and so on, or in fewer games. Now I know, of course, Brett Saberhagen became the hero pitching a Game 7 shutout, but we talked last time. I wrote a book about the 1988 Dodgers, focusing on the unsung heroes. I want to talk about Charlie Liebrandt. You know, if he had very hard, well, he was a hard luck pitcher, I should say. Like he was 1-7 in the postseason, like in his career, and he pitched some great games for the Royals. That series, and he took a shutout into the ninth inning, Game 2, but the Cardinals came back, won that one. He was the one who pitched in Game 6, if I understand correctly, and the only win in his postseason career for Charlie Liebrandt came, ironically, in Game 7 in the ALCS in the Jim Sundberg game. So, did you get a chance to talk to him, and what are your thoughts on that? How this series could have gone a different way, or his legacy might have gone a different way if things had gone differently.
I'm so delighted that you focus on him. First off, yes, I did talk to Charlie Lee Brandt. I talked to him back in 2021, actually on the 1 year anniversary of the day I conceived the book, April 15th. Yeah, Charlie Lee Brandt, aka Rembrandt. He got that nickname from his teammates because his ability to paint the corners with his pitches. Yes, you are right. We talked about that. He told me how confident he felt in Game 7 of the ALCS. He came on in relief after Saberhagen had another freak injury, and he got the win, and they go to the World Series. But Charlie Lee Brandt, he was just the recipient of bad luck. Like especially in Game 2, where you mentioned that the Royals lead 2-0 going into the ninth. Lee Brandt's cruising, and then the Cardinals they staged a comeback through not like big home runs or anything. They were just like these fluky hits by guys you wouldn't expect much from, either like Tito Landrum or Terry Pendleton. It wasn't like Jack Clark and Ozzie Smith. So he was just the recipient of bad luck. A lot of people second guessed Royals manager Dick Howser and said he should have gone to Dan Quisenberry to start the ninth, but that was, Monday morning quarterbacking. Yeah, and then Game 6, the same thing. He pitched a brilliant game, but just started to just miss a bit in the eighth, gave up a go-ahead pinch hit to Brian Harper, but as we know, the Royals would still escape with the win. So yeah, Charlie definitely had a lot of rough luck in the playoffs, but at least he'll always have the ring. So yeah, I'd say that evens it out.
Yeah, again, you're talking about like legacies because I know that for example, you being a Dodger fan, like when the Dodgers won the first World Series in LA, Larry Sherry, a relief pitcher, was like a star, but long forgotten. And then, same thing with 85, the Royals, Charlie Liebrand. Like if he had gotten a couple of breaks here and there, he might be better remembered, in baseball annals, if you will. Yeah, so now I want to talk about the Royals then. Now, again, not to mention it repeatedly, but I wrote that book on 88 Dodgers, and there were players who said that when Kirk Gibson hit that home run off Dennis Eckersley in Game 1, the Dodgers knew that they were going to win it. I saw like a MLB Network documentary years ago. They're talking about the 1990 Cincinnati Reds, and Barry Larkin was on camera saying that as soon as Ricky Henderson struck out to open the first game of the 1990 World Series, Barry Larkin knew that the Reds were going to win. And even Howard Johnson, I spoke with him, a few years ago. He was on the '84 Tigers team that won the World Series, and he said like when the Tigers brought in a reliever by the name of Willie Hernandez in spring training, the Tigers players knew they're gonna win the World Series that year. Did you get a sense of anything like from the Royals as far as like knowing quote unquote when they're gonna win it?
Oh yes. Yes, they were pretty clear about that. And their equivalent of that was winning Game 6 of that 85 series with the Denkinger call and all that. Once they won that game, they knew they were going to win. Lynn Jones, backup outfielder for the Royals, said we knew we were going to win. Steve Balboni told me that like in the locker room, Hal McRae was just like it's over. Another thing they did was the Royals were so confident they were going to win Game 7 that they formed a conga line and they started chanting Tudor, Tudor, because they were going to face John Tudor. And they didn't care that John Tudor had already beat them twice. They knew they were going to do it, and then they shelled him. Yeah, yeah. Once they won Game 6, they knew they had it. They said that before they said that to me in the interviews. Yeah, there was no doubt.
That's interesting. It's like momentum, right? In the year after, it was the same thing with the Mets when they came back against Boston in Game 6. You figure that they knew they were gonna win game number 7. That's great stuff. Now I want to talk a little bit about whether you learned something like that was new or you kind of forgot about or and you kind of were reminded of it. Because I know, like when I wrote, my books, the '88 Dodgers, for example, there were some people that told me, oh, they forgot or they didn't know about this prank by Jesse Orosco in spring training when I guess he put something eye black on Kurt Gibson's hat or something like that. That was like a
Hmm.
big event in spring training '88. With respect to the '85 Royals Cardinals World Series, or just within the season of both clubs, was there anything that you found out from your research or through talking to the players that made you think, oh wow, I didn't know about this, or I for completely forgotten about this?
Well, that's a great question because that's the one of the main points of this book is to open up a lot of these forgotten and overlooked moments beyond just Stankinger's call. The first and most important point of order adjacent to that, and I found this through research, and I did discuss it in interviews too. There was actually another blown call earlier in Game 6 that went against the Royals. In the bottom of the fourth inning, Frank White got a bunt single. Royal second baseman Frank White got a bunt single, and he tried to steal second. He was called out on the throw, but the replays by ABC Sports showed, all the announcers like Al Michaels were saying like, "Oh, he's clearly safe." And then on cue, Pat Sheridan hit a single to right that would have scored White easily. And if that had happened, the Royals would be up 1-0 early, and it would change the momentum. It could change momentum, or it would turn the lineup over differently. So there's a good chance you don't even have the Denkinger call in the ninth. So that, and I talked to Frank White himself about that. He was my last interview. I even brought it up to George Brown when I interviewed him, and he said, I didn't know about that. So I made it a point, like, Cardinal fans have always just singled out the Denkinger call like it was the fatal blow. I'm like, by that logic, you have to focus on this call too. So I'd say, among so many other things, that's probably the most interesting revelation I found in my research.
Now that is something I did not know. You got me there because I think I'm pretty knowledgeable when it comes to you know World Series history or baseball history, but that one I did not know. We're talking to Marshall Garvey from Sacramento, California, here on the KPW podcast, and we're talking about his new book, Interstate 85, The Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. And you mentioned Marshall talking to George Brett, talking to Frank White. Now, I don't know if this is true for you or not, but I spoke to a hockey writer, some time ago, and he told me that it was hard to get a chance to talk to like the bigger names. And what he did was, he had to email Patrick Waugh, the Montreal Canadiens Hall of Fame goalie, at least 30 times before he got a response. Or in order to talk to Wayne Gretzky, he had to leverage, like he talked to an LA Kings lesser known player and then kind of work his way up and got to Gretzky's agent and said, oh, by the way, I've spoken to this, and this, and this, and this Kings player. Now, do you think I can get an interview with Wayne Gretzky? So I know it's a completely different sport, but did you have to did you have a lot of trouble trying to track down any of the players, or was it not as tough as you thought?
To be honest, it was not as tough as I thought to get them. Tracking them down, I just kept developing ways and finding ways like, okay, this one's easy to find, or maybe I should message this person's relative, or Frank White is a politician in Kansas City now, so I had to fill out a whole form on the Jackson County, website. But honestly, they were all willing to talk. George Brett was actually really easy to get. I think it was just a matter of persistence. Because I developed the book for a few years. Interviews were conducted between 2021 and 2023. And so the interviews just kind of came in different phases. Like there were certain people I was meant to talk to at a certain time, and then later on I would get another batch of players. It was a lot of work. I'm not necessarily saying easy. It was a lot of labor, a lot of networking and following up. But once I got a hold of players, they were pretty much all willing to talk. So yeah, I didn't have to do anything like that. I would use my prior interviews as leverage, like, hello, so and so, I've talked to all your teammates. Would talk too? But like what you described with like trying to work up to Wayne Gretzky, no, I didn't have to go through anything like that, fortunately.
You spoke with Ricky Horton, if I understand correctly. He
Yeah.
first played for the Cardinals in '85 and also lost the '87 World Series with the Cardinals, but won the World Series in 1988 with the LA Dodgers. That was one player I tried to get in touch with, Ricky Horton. When I was writing the '88 Dodger book, I did not get in contact with him, so I was unlucky in that sense. But you talked to him, so you must have thrown in some Dodger questions with him as well. Like, what was that like? Because he lost in '85 and '87, got traded to LA, and then won a ring.
Oh gosh, he was one of my best interviews. He was the first Cardinal I interviewed for the book, and I made it a point that he'd be the first Cardinal. He's terrific. And yeah, we talked. Not only did we talk about the his time with the Dodgers in '88, but it actually shows up in chapter 11. I have a little passage where I talk about the few '85 Cardinals that were able to get a ring elsewhere, and he and John Tudor were reunited on the '88 Dodgers and got the ring there. Horton told me a great story, like he was out in the bullpen, the home bullpen when Gibson strode up, and he and Jay Howell were talking to each other like, well, what's the sort of doing here? And obviously Gibson hits the home run, and Horton said he was one of the first people at Dodger Stadium the next day, the following morning, and he walked in on Kirk Gibson like rewinding the tape, and you see the brake lights in the parking lot as the home run goes out. And of course, after they won it, Horton told me a really beautiful story. After the champagne spray in the clubhouse in Oakland, he went out to the infield with his infant daughter and he just kind of bounced her up and down in this really happy moment. And he got so caught up in it, he didn't realize that there was like media all around him taking pictures. But yeah, Rick Horton is absolute class. I means so much to me for the Dodgers, for the Miracle Men of '88, and for helping out with this book. Yeah, Rick is great. If you ever do get a chance to talk to him down the road, let me know. Maybe I could connect you. He's terrific.
That's awesome. No, were you able to talk to Brett Saberhagen? Because again, the World Series MVP and looked like early in his career he was going to be like a Hall of Famer, but injuries happened and he fell off, if you will. But talk about like a 20-year-old. His wife had just given birth, I believe, the day before, and then he went and pitched a Game 7 shutout to cap off like a Cy Young season. And did you get a chance to talk to him? And if not, anecdotes what did you learn from teammates about him?
I did not get to talk to him. He's a pretty guarded. He and I are totally cool. Yeah, we actually follow each other on Instagram. He's in Southern California. He runs a cancer charity called Saves Wings. And Brett's super cool. But I, of course, did great research on him. I mean, he was the World Series MVP. Yeah, I talked to other teammates. They just talked about like just how brilliant his pitching was. Like again, he was only 21, but I described him in the book as like the command on his pitches. He looked more like a veteran Hall of Famer, like Tom Seaver or something. Jim Sundberg told me before Game 7, he was at a park in Kansas City, just kind of quietly sitting, and he was like, I just don't know what's going to happen. I don't know which team's going to win. I have this uncertainty. Sundberg told me after catching one inning by Saberhagen, he walked over to Royals manager Dick Howser and said, we're going to win this game. Like that's how locked in Saberhagen was. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot about his career. One thing I learned was you talked about he looked like a Hall of Famer, but Saberhagen was inconsistent season to season. You know, You always think, I always kind of think of like the similar, you think of like the Giants had their even year titles, and then in the odd years they'd have the hangover. Saberhagen was the opposite. His odd years, like 85 and 89, were just the best you'd ever seen, and his even years were really uneven. If he had been great season to season, like enough, I think he'd be in the Hall of Fame. You know, he's got two more Cy Youngs than Jack Morris, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, postseason legacy is so you have to have the breaks, and in his case, in Saberhagen's case, you're right. It was the odd number year versus the even number years. It was just quite interesting, and I think again, talking about Charlie Liebrandt earlier, it's like if he had gotten a few more breaks, he might have won more games in the postseason and be better remembered. What about guys like Bud Black and Mark Gubazar? I understand you spoke with them also, and they were important pieces in the Kansas City rotation. I talked to Don Slott, catcher who was with the Royals the year before and was traded for Sundberg,
Mhm.
traded to Texas for Jim Sundberg before that season. And I talked to Don Slott. I said, like, you had good pitching staff in Pittsburgh, in Kansas City. How do you compare them? And Slott told me that, the staff in Kansas City was great. They had Danny Jackson, Bud Black, Saberhagen, Lee Brandt, Mark Gubazar, these young guys coming up. So in talking to Black and to Gubazar, did they give you a sense of what that team could have been like had they stuck together or anything like that?
So Black and Gubazov were two of my best interviews, and especially they were crucial because they teamed up to win Game 6 of the ALCS. Gubazov started, and then Bud Black came on in relief to hold the Blue Jays down and keep their season alive because they had to come back from down 3 games to one. Gubazov and Black, yeah, and that's an interesting thing to talk about. Like, yeah, they still hung around for a few years. I mean, Gubazov stayed with the Royals until 1996. They basically the Royals did keep that core together for the next few years, but they just kind of weren't able to make it to the playoffs again. It's kind of maybe a little inexplicable. But Black and Gubazov were very insightful. They're great storytellers, total class acts, both of them. And yeah, what was I gonna say? I did ask some others like, yeah, why did it not really come together with another championship for the rest of that era? But one way you can look at it is that at least they got over the hump in '85, although it would be a long time before the Royals got back to the World Series.
It's funny because the year before they actually got to the playoffs as well the year before in '84, but they just ran into a powerhouse Tigers team that I mentioned earlier. It's funny because back in those days you had to win your division to make the playoffs, and it was one team per division. And it's interesting because I talked to Mark Gubazar a few years ago. It was now, and I asked him about 1994 specifically. It was a strike year, and depending on who you talk to, if you talk to players from the LA Dodgers, they felt that in '94 they could have gone through the World Series. And I talked to Gubazar about the '94 Royals, and they were in the thick of things. But he thought that it was interesting that they could have made a run, but it was just again the strike killed that. And it's I guess with more playoff teams these days. It's a crapshoot, in the postseason. But back then, you had to win your division. And interestingly enough, like I did not know this until like recently, like last year, I looked this up. Like that in 1990. Like 5 years after that, in 1990, the Royals actually had the highest payroll in Major League Baseball, which you kind of like, it would be a shock. You wouldn't think of the Royals small market franchise doing that. But they did try to pick up pieces, but it just never worked out for them. Again, just because you had just the one team that could make the playoffs from each division. And in those days, in the late '80s and early '90s, it was Oakland that was the dominant team.
Right.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead, Rodriguez. Go
No,
ahead.
no. I was gonna hear your thoughts, Marshall.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, yeah, the lack of that's such a great point. The lack of the wild card. Chris Brown, former Royals bat boy and now baseball executive I interviewed, he said like he wishes there was a wild card back then because there would be more playoff appearances. And like, yeah, the Royals still had some good teams, but like you said, once Oakland became the clear powerhouse in the West, like they just couldn't really overcome them. In '89, the Royals had a better record than they did in '85 and still finished 7 games behind the A's, who of course won the World Series that year. Yeah, it's there was definitely some rough luck. Just some unfortunate, yeah, some good teams that just, weren't close enough to top Oakland in some years. And also just various players were leaving. 1990 was like a real turning point. Frank White retired after that. Willie Wilson was gone. John Sherholtz, their Hall of Fame GM, left for Atlanta. Yeah, and as it were, they didn't make the playoffs again until 2014, and when they did make it that year, it was as a wild card. So it's kind of a good point. Yeah, with the expanded field now, you got more chances. But yeah, back then, yeah, you either won your division or you watch from home.
Good stuff. Yeah, definitely baseball has changed since then, and I think this is will be a great book for baseball fans to pick up and to learn the history of the I guess the two teams that made it to the World Series that year. And I don't know how much you covered the playoff run, but definitely the Cardinals coming back against the LA Dodgers in the NLCS and the Royals coming back against the Blue Jays down 3 games to 1. It was basically a postseason of comebacks. So what were some cool tidbits that you picked up from like the NLCS with the Dodgers and the Cardinals?
Oh, so many. Well, first off, that it literally has its own chapter. Chapter 4, Comeback October. And yeah, the Cardinals had to come back from down 2 games to nothing, and the Royals had to come back from 3 games to 1. They actually fell behind 2-0 against the Blue Jays as well. The Royals and Cardinals were mirroring each other in a lot of ways. So many great tidbits. Well, with respect to the Cardinals Dodgers NLCS, I got a really unique one. Now, game 5 of that series is very famous, especially in Cardinal lore. That's when Ozzie Smith hit his surprising home run off of Dodgers closer Tom Nadenfuhr, and Jack Buck, Cardinals announcer, says, "Go crazy, folks, go crazy." The winning pitcher of that game was reliever Jeff Lottie. Super nice, funny guy, lives in Oregon. He told me he for years he could not beat the Dodgers. They just torched him over and over. But in that ninth inning, he sent them down in order, and then Ozzie hit the home run, and he was so relieved. He was just like, "We won. It was an amazing home run, and if I had to go out for the 10th, I probably would have been shelled because it was the Dodgers. Like I finally did it." So, um, tons of great stories. Yeah, Mark Ubisoff starting Game 6 of the ALCS. He told me his father, uncle, and American Legion coach came up to Toronto, but they came so last minute that they had to stay in Gubazov's hotel room, so they were snoring all night. And he couldn't really get any sleep before his big start, but he was used to that. Like usually don't get much sleep before you start a game, so he was able to get through it. Yeah, a lot of great stories. Steve Farr, miracle hero for the Royals in Game 3 of the ALCS. He nearly quit baseball earlier in '85. Game 3 looks like it's about to slide off the rails. Blue Jays are close to putting it out of reach, and he comes in and rescues the day and starts the series comeback. Um, you also mentioned Jim Sundberg, the catcher. He hit that triple in Game 7 that was this close to being Grand Slam. He told me a beautiful story about how flying out to Toronto, he had like a spiritual moment in his soul where his spirit told him something big is going to happen. And sure enough, in Game 7, it happened. So yeah, that chapter is one of my favorites because there's a lot of unique stories there that I couldn't just do, as a side note, talking about the World Series. I had to talk about the playoffs, and yeah, there's a lot of that's just the tip of the iceberg. Lots of great tidbits in chapter 4.
That's amazing. Yeah, you gotta get out. You gotta get out and get this book if you're listening to this podcast. Now, the Mark Gubazar story that you mentioned, yeah, he told me the same thing because I interviewed him for one of the books I was writing, and yeah, he mentioned his uncle, his coach, his father coming to see him pitch, and they were snoring away in his hotel room and stuff. And he told me a story about how Tom Seaver had told him about, the it is not the night before your
It's
start that you should get, the sleep is the night before that, because the night before your start, you're not going to be able to sleep anyway. So the night before that, it's important to sleep well. And then he made a point of telling me that, and he said he went around and I guess he learned from Don Drysdale or Bob Gibson or Tom Seaver. He was trying to pick the brains of all these legendary pitchers that had success in the big leagues, and he was able to pick up a few pointers, and yeah, that was great.
Yeah, he told me the exact same thing. Yeah, he said it was Tom Seaver that gave him that advice, and that's in the book. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and he pitched really well. And that 85 Blue Jays team was terrifying. They had a really lefty heavy lineup that really torched right-handers, but Gubazai had a really strong start that led to a victory and that set up game seven. So yeah. And Gubazov, funny enough, did not pitch in the World Series. He told me a great story. He and again I mentioned Steve Farr. They didn't, despite being heroes in the ALCS, they didn't get to pitch in the World Series. So during game seven, when the Royals were running away with an 11-0 blowout, they walked up, Gubazov and Farr walked up to Dick Hauser and they were like, oh, come on, let us pinch run. We haven't played yet, So I thought it was pretty funny.
The manager said no.
Yeah, obviously would go and do that, but they still got the ring. So again, it's all that matters.
This has been a very fun conversation. Speaking with Marshall Garvey, a writer from the Sacramento, California area. The book is titled Interstate 85: The Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. So this is a book that is coming out in late March, in time for the 40th anniversary of the 1985 World Series. And yeah, where can we pick this book up, Marshall?
So the book is officially out next week on March 27th, opening day, and you can pre-order now and of course order at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, basically anywhere you buy books, any major book retailer, you'll be able to get it there. And if you want a signed, personalized copy, feel free to contact me and I can accommodate that.
We can find you on Facebook. Is that right, Marshall?
Yes, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram. Also head to my writer's website, marshallpgarvey.com. You can get my contact info there. So yeah, I'm excited for everyone to read this book. It was a very unique journey writing it, 5-year journey unlike any other, and I'm proud of the final result and I'm excited for the world to see it. I think it does an underrated time in baseball history justice.
So you said marshallpgarvey.com.
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Marshall Garvey. This has been a blast, and I think I'll look forward to reading the book. Look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
You bet. Appreciate you having me.
Once again, that's Marshall Garvey here on the KPW podcast. The book is Interstate 85: The Royals, the Cardinals, and the Show Me World Series. And pick it up anywhere, whether it's Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or your favorite bookstore.